Welcome to the Heavy Metal Detectors Podcast. We'd like to thank you for tuning in to the show and hope you'll stick with us through these first few episodes and the production flaws. The Heavy Metal Detectors Podcast is brought to you in conjunction with the Heavy Metal Detectors Facebook group. If you're looking for a place to connect with other detectors in your area, search Heavy Metal Detectors and join a group in your state. Start sharing your latest finds, tips, and questions. Just search the Heavy Metal Detectors on Facebook and join the fun. You'll be glad you did. On this episode of Heavy Metal Detectors Podcast, we're going to be discussing tips and advice for people just starting to get into metal detecting and the beginner. We have special guest Wayne Morin with metal detecting stuff here with us today. Wayne, thank you for joining
Yes,
the
sir.
show, and how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great.
Good, good. So you're the owner of Metal Detecting Stuff in Texas. Tell us a little bit about your business.
Okay. Well, I'm a partner in it. There's two of us that own the company, and we started it company started in 2009, and we took it over from a buddy of ours in 2011. So we actually do still have a storefront, which most of the dealers either work out of their house or drop ship from the suppliers, but we actually do have a storefront here in the Woodlands, Texas, just north of Houston. And so we're what you would call a stocking dealer in that we keep products in stock. If there's something out of stock, we can still drop ship from our supplier. But we built our business on the fact that we use what we sell. We won't carry anything that we won't use out in the field, and we think we provide a nice high level of customer service by being able to answer customer questions about the products because we use them out in the field. We're familiar with them.
Right. All right. Sounds good. So, what got you started in metal detecting?
Well, about 40 years ago, when I was in my 20s, my brother went. We were both living at home, and there was a manufacturer about 2 blocks from where we grew up, and it was a company called Relco Electronics, and they made metal detectors. And so this was in the early 70s. And so he went down and he bought a metal detector, and we went out and luckily dug some silver coins in the yard and expanded from there. So I guess I've detected off and on for about 40 years, and probably pretty heavily since about 2000 on. And I've been doing it on a very regular basis.
So, what would you say is probably the most important thing for that person that's just starting to get into metal detecting? They probably haven't bought their first machine yet. And they're just really interested in getting started, but they don't know where to start.
Well, I usually tell people that the first thing they need to do is set a budget, and then do a little research on where they want to hunt and the types of targets that they want to acquire. So some people prefer to go to the beach, which has the salt water. Others like to hunt in lakes, and others just like to hunt around parks and old home sites. So, I tell them to determine where they're going to hunt first, because they'll need to decide if they want a waterproof unit or possibly a unit that'll work well in mineralization like the salt. And then, try to buy as much of a detector that they can afford, but not necessarily go all the way to the high end, because some of the high end machines are a bit more complicated, and some people can get frustrated with all the settings and things like that.
Right. That's one of the things when I first started out. I started out with a Dr. Otech, and very quickly realized that I needed to upgrade from there. But that first machine really got me hooked and really got me into metal detecting. And it's been nonstop from there. Uh,
Yeah, I usually tell people, any machine will detect metal, but the cheaper ones that you might find at one of the big box stores, or some even some of the Chinese detectors on Amazon, they'll find metal, but they generally don't discriminate very well. So you spend a lot of time digging a lot of small nails and things like that. So the thing about buying a quality machine from a big name is that you're going to have the USA service on it, and they generally discriminate better, and you've got a lot more resources on, for instance, YouTube to see the units in action.
Right. And would you say that YouTube's a valuable uh, asset for the beginner to be able to watch those videos and see how machines work, see how to dig a plug, how to do settings on the machine, and just seeing the hobby in general?
I think it's a fantastic resource. In fact, I refer a lot of my new users or people that are upgrading to YouTube to actually see the machines in action. But I do tell them to take it with a grain of salt, because you're going to have, I guess, what you would call fanboys that, it's just like when you're talking cars, you got people that like Fords and you got people like Chevys. So it's the same thing in metal detectors. There's people that like MindLab, people that like Garrett, people that like XP. So you kind of have to look at a lot of videos and weigh the pros and cons you see in each. Any machine can be programmed to either perform well or underperform. So, if you're looking at a video, the real value in the videos is actually to see the machines in action, see how to do the settings, and to watch, like you said, to watch how to dig a proper plug and proper etiquette in the hobby.
Right. And, like you said, there's a lot of people that they'll push one machine over another. The most important thing is getting the machine and getting out there and getting started. What other advice or tips would you give to that person that's just now looking to get into the hobby of metal detecting?
Well, so the first thing I recommend is be sure you get the proper equipment, get a good detector, get a pinpointer, because 90% of us use pinpointers out in the field. It'll help you recover targets more quickly and eliminate some of the initial frustration of trying to find the target in the hole. And then I tell people you can go out in your backyard with your new detector, take some various denominations of coins and sprinkle them on the grass and practice swinging over them to see how the detector responds.
And speaking of that, taking different denominations and different things out and putting them in your yard, do you think that test garden is very beneficial to the first time user to figure out what each beep sounds like, what each different metal sounds like?
Test gardens are really nice, I think, for looking at the extremes of what a machine can or a detector can do. I think for a very beginner, rather than just taking the time to build a test garden, while they can do that, it's very simple just to lay the targets on the grass and practice pinpointing over it. That way, you've got the visual contact that you can see where it's reacting to the coil, and you can play with the raising or lowering the coil to look at the depth indicators.
And then, we were talking about practicing digging that plug. How important is that to have that practice and be able to dig or make that perfect plug when you find your target and replacing it when it comes to the outlook and the overall of metal detecting?
Well, I think it's a very 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 important in that, metal detecting, you want to leave a good impression. So especially if you're hunting in if your town allows detecting in city parks or schools on the weekends, you don't want to leave holes out there or have an impression that you just kind of torn up the field. So, the better detectors that do a good job with the plugs can almost leave a site where you can't even tell they've been there. And I think that's real healthy for the hobby. And if you go in somebody's manicured yard, you don't want to You don't want to have a bunch of holes sitting there that somebody can trip in, or you don't want to have a bunch of dead spots, where you've dug all the grass up. So if you do a proper, what we call a horseshoe or three-sided plug, usually you can flip it over and keep some of the roots intact and recover your target and then replace the plug and go on to the next target.
And would you say that carrying a bottle of water with you once you replace that plug and maybe put some water on it, maybe even some fertilized water, would be beneficial in helping with that grass taking back hold and leaving an untraceable place where people don't really know that someone's metal detect?
I think that's a good idea. I haven't seen a lot of people do that, but a lot of us will use a towel, and any dirt that we take out, we can lay on the towel and pour that back in the hole too. But the water is an excellent idea, and anything we can do to preserve the hobby and provide the right impression to the homeowners or the park officials is a great asset.
What would you say is the one thing that frustrates the new metal detector the most and maybe gets them to stop participating in the hobby of metal detecting?
Well, I think it's two part. One is trying to learn their new machine, and even experienced users, when they upgrade and get a new machine, they can tend to get a little frustrated. I like to tell people that when you get a machine, until you put about 30 hours of detecting on it, you're probably not going to understand it as well as you will after that 30 hour. And so, learning the machine is a bit of a challenge initially for some people. And the other thing is not realizing that we all dig a level of trash, and there is going to be a lot of trash targets that you're going to dig. For instance, what we call can slaw, which is little pieces of aluminum that are chopped up by lawnmowers, from soda cans. And the detectors have a hard time with the can slaw because of their irregular shape. And so, people do tend to, especially new people, tend to get a little frustrated with some of the trash they dig. But if you go to YouTube and learn the proper way to set your discrimination, you'll eliminate some of that. I think you'll enjoy the hobby a lot better.
And speaking of discrimination, can you kind of explain what that is and how we as metal detectors use that to help distinguish between targets?
Sure. So most of the quality detectors, the name brands, have a some discrimination circuits, and some are preset, what we call preset modes. Like, for instance, some of the detectors have a park mode or a field mode for pastures or a beach mode. So some of those modes have uh, preset discrimination, which allows you to eliminate the most undesirable targets, which in most cases is small iron like nails. And so if you do set it up for a basic discrimination pattern, you're not going to dig as many nails, but you will dig your coins, your silver, your buttons, the jewelry, the more desirable targets. Some of the better detectors have uh, what they call notch discrimination, where you can actually go in and notch out individual targets, or individual sectors of targets. So if you don't want to dig bottle caps and you don't want to dig pull tabs, you can set a detector up to eliminate those targets. But I'd give you one caveat with that: if you eliminate the pull tabs, you will eliminate some of the smaller gold jewelry that some of us like to find. So you want to be cognizant of what you're discriminating out. But the good detectors have preset modes that work really well. And for instance, if you're hunting a beach and there's if you're in the dry sand, which is where most of the bottle caps are and pull tabs, you can discriminate out those bottle caps and not spend all day digging them if you don't want to. But you are going to possibly lose some good value targets in there too.
And speaking of those pull tabs, some of the older nickels, like V nickels, and some of that silver coinage, can also ring up as a pull tab as well. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I can, as a dealer, I have a pretty good relationship with a lot of my customers, and I can't tell you how many times I've had a customer call me that, for instance, had an AT Pro and said, they know that 52, 53 is right on the verge of a nickel and a pull tab, but I've had several customers call and say, "Hey, I found a nice gold ring, and I just knew it was going to be a pull tab because of the number on the screen." So but they went ahead and dug it and were rewarded with a nice gold ring.
And speaking of that, would you advise when you're first starting out that no matter what tone or what number you get on your screen, to dig everything that you find?
I think it's real important initially when you get either a new machine or a new person in the hobby to really learn it. You need to dig as much of the targets as you can. I generally tell people to look for what I call a repeatable signal. So, for instance, if you're swinging left or right and you only get a signal one way, then a lot of times you dig that and you will find it to be trash. But generally, when you get a repeatable signal from left to right, it's generally going to be a pretty solid target. And also I tell people when you get a new machine, you're generally going to see some better finds because most of the experienced users over time they know their machine so well that they do what we call cherry picking their targets. So they'll swing over a target, get an ID number, and they'll go, "Oh, I know what that is. I'm not very big." But when you get a new machine, you don't have that experience with it, so you got to dig everything. And generally, you start out having what we call beginner's luck because if you have to dig all the targets, you're going to generally find some of those targets that you normally wouldn't have picked.
And speaking of those ID numbers, most machines they do have an ID number on the screen when you get a tone, and it gives you a tone signal as well. Would you say that looking at the ID number or listening to the different tones is more important in the beginning?
I think it's all information that helps you process the information, and I like to hunt more by tone personally, but I use the ID numbers to help me determine, whether or not I'm going to dig that particular target. But the IDs are the tones are very important, especially when you're hunting in an area with quite a bit of multiple targets. An area that we call a trashy area. A lot of times, a lot of us will either use a smaller coil in a trashy area, or we'll listen for a high chirp on the detector to give us an indication that there might be a non-ferrous target alongside the ferrous target.
When I first started out, I was the same way. I listened to the tones, took those coins out in the yard and listened to what each coin, the tone it gave me, I've started getting more into the ID numbers, but it was getting into that. It was really more beneficial being able to hear what iron sounded like compared to silver or some of those other targets. And then it really helped with the transition to watching those ID numbers.
Oh, definitely. I think that's a really good use of the IDs and the tones.
And then as far as a good quality metal detector to start out with and a pinpointer, what other equipment would you advise for that new beginner to get before their first time out in the field?
Well, the three other things that I'd recommend would be a set of headphones, um, because that also not only helps you hear the targets better, but it makes you a little less obtrusive to people that may be around you in a park setting. So a set of headphones, a good quality digging tool, and a what we call a finds bag or a digging pouch. You want to have something that not only can you put the good targets in that you find, but you also want to take out any trash that you've dug to leave the site clean when you're finished with it.
And that goes back with that plug and making sure that you put those plugs back, and taking the trash out is just as important. Um, so that when you leave a spot, no one's giving the hobby of metal detecting a black eye. Do you agree?
I agree, very much so. There are cities around the country that have stopped allowing metal detecting in some of the public areas because there's been people that have gone in there and left holes or left trash laying out, and it's unfortunate. We want to be good stewards of the hobby and promote the proper way and proper techniques to be successful.
And then, would you advise new beginners to get on Facebook or in their local area search for a metal detecting club to join, so maybe they can get some mentorship and build friendships inside the hobby?
I think that's a very important aspect. If there's a club in your area, to join that, and generally they'll do at least a few club hunts a year. Some clubs actually have them pretty regularly, and that's a great opportunity to get out with others and see some of the similar machines in action. And then if there are no clubs in your area, there are quite a few Facebook groups for metal detecting, and like the heavy metal detecting Kentucky group that you guys have, and we have a lot of groups here in Texas that are great resources for people to meet up and go out together and also ask questions and share their finds.
No, and that's something that we find, uh, or I think at least we find, is something hard in the hobby is finding those mentorships and friendships to learn the hobby of metal detecting. Do you have any advice on maybe finding or helping with the mentorship when it comes to metal detecting?
Well, you need to see what's available in your area, whether it's a club or a Facebook group, or for instance, in Texas, we have a thing called the Texas Association of Metal Detecting Clubs, and most of the clubs in the state are members of that. So it's a great resource. And we actually have an annual, kind of like an annual convention. It's actually, we call it the Treasure Show. And all the clubs get together and they stow display cases of some of the things they found. And it's a great place to meet people and hook up with others that share a common interest.
And then, speaking of showing and displaying finds, with the beginner, I learned very early that when you find a coin, you don't necessarily want to rub it between your fingers. You want to get a spray bottle, spray some water on it, use a nylon brush, and slowly take the dirt off. What advice would you give to the beginner on cleaning those finds out in the field when they find them to ID them, and then how to kind of take care of them when they get home?
Well, so there's depending on the type of target, it's going to determine how you want to take care of it. Like you mentioned, you don't want to take a silver dollar and go put silver polish on it. That's the worst thing you can do, unless it's just something you want to keep for display purpose. You generally don't want to use anything more than soap and water on coins. Um, at some point, if you get quite an accumulation of coins, like most of us do, you can go through and check the dates and verify that if there's no numismatic value, then some of us will use a rock tumbler and some aquarium gravel and some soap and tumble the what we call the common coins that aren't rare to make them a little easier to spend or roll and take to the bank. Other targets, some of your buttons and iron targets and things like that, you need to do a lot of research before you clean them. There are some good cleaning products out there for buttons, but it depends on the type of the button. So you want to do some research before you take anything that might have some rarity to it and be sure you're using the right product on it. YouTube's another good resource for that. You'll see people posting how to clean things, and like your iron, big iron relics that you find. Some people will go through a process called electrolysis to remove the rust on them and then try to restore them. I've seen some amazing work on both like bayonets on Civil War swords, and things like that. That people have done a really good job of electrolysis and getting them into a protected condition so they don't continue to deteriorate when the oxygen gets to them.
And then when you come to finding copper, and especially old copper, it has that green patina to it. How important is it to take care in cleaning that and making sure that patina stays on there, and just taking care of the copper itself, because copper is such a soft metal?
I think it's real important. To be honest, like Indian head pennies, generally, if you wash them with soap and water, you're generally going to find that they're not going to be in very desirable condition when you get done. So uh, on coins like that have the green patina, I generally just brush them with a nylon brush and then put them in what we call a 2x2 mylar plastic and cardboard holder to keep the air from continuing to affect them. But I've seen a lot of, and personally, when I first started out, I would take the Indian head pennies and go and wash them really well, and then I noticed they lost a lot of the detail because the water didn't do it any favors. You need to do a little research on what you're planning to clean before you go about cleaning it.
And that's a great point. I've destroyed some coins like that too, just when I was first starting out. Thought maybe they were a newer coin, couldn't really see the date on them or what they were, so some soap and water, brush them off real extensively to find out that it was an Indian head, and now that patina's gone and it's not in great shape. So, great point there. Um, you know, and then displaying your finds. We've talked a little bit about that. What would you say is the most important when it comes to displaying those and how to display them?
Well, a lot of people will use display cases. Some people put them in a like an album, and they'll get a like a notebook and get some holders that will hold the coins and slide them into an album so they can. I've even had a person that took the album with him when he went to door knock for permission on old homes, and he would kind of flip through to show the types of coins that he's found at some of the old home sites, and it's helped him secure some new permissions. But your jewelry and things like that, you can put in a nice what we call a Riker display case. Um, Same thing with some of your relics. You can either put them on a shelf or put them in a nice display case, just so you have it. And a lot of times I'll take and I'll type up a little thing identifying what it is and possibly where it was found.
And with so much history in the ground, that I think that's important to put that description out there with it when it's displayed, so people understand what it is and what they're looking at. America has such a rich and great history, and a lot of it's in the ground, just waiting for us to find it.
That's very true, and we mentioned the Facebook groups earlier. Those are a great resource. A lot of the times we'll dig things that we don't exactly know what they are, and both using things like Google Lens and Facebook groups will help you hopefully to identify what something is that you found, and to be able to give you a little idea of the history of the item and the history of the location.
And then you touched on it just a little bit. We've talked about digging in public places, public parks, and that avenue. But kind of describe the process or how important it is for these new beginners to get permissions on private property to be able to get in and detect on those, and even sharing those finds with the land or homeowner.
I think it's real important. I always tell people don't hunt anywhere that you don't have permission because, you don't want to be trespassing on somebody's property. You wouldn't want somebody to come up to your house and just start digging in your yard without permission. So permissions are very important to have. About the sharing of finds, a lot of times I'll show the homeowner what I found. I won't necessarily go out and say, uh, do you want half of it or anything like that? But I've had a few occasions where somebody would look at it and they'd say, hey, I had a 1900 house that I was hunting one time, and the gentleman came up to see what I found, and he saw a part for an old car that he'd been working on restoring that was in the things that I found. So, he asked if he could have that. Of course, I very happily gave it up to him. And another time I had a very rare Civil War button that I gave to the homeowner to thank him for giving me access to his property. And things like that open up a lot of doors for you. If you do share something like that, a lot of times they'll tell their neighbor, hey, this person found this on my property, and that'll get you in a lot more doors.
Right, and I think it's important to once you're done for the day to show the landowner what you found or the homeowner if it's just a house with some small property. It gets them excited, shows them that metal detecting's not a bad thing. I've had the instance where I've went up and door knocked and asked permissions for places, and they've heard horrible things and horrible stories about metal detecting, and they're just scared to let you detect on their property. That's a great point. You don't necessarily have to offer to give them everything you find, but at least offer to show them what you found and keep them excited about it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another thing you can do is when you get permission, is you can ask them if there's anything that they remember that they've lost on the property. And occasionally somebody will say, "Oh, well, my mother lost a ring out in the backyard," and so that gives you an opportunity to uh, return something that has a good sentimental value back to the landowner, and it helps show respect in our hobby, and it'll promote more opportunities to get you into additional sites.
And we see a lot of people on Facebook post. They offer their services to find lost items, like you were talking about, with the rings or sentimental stuff or keys or something that the homeowner has lost in the yard. Um, do you think that's an avenue for beginners to use to be able to gain permissions on property, or do you think they should wait till they're a little more advanced before they start trying to do some things like that?
If you've got a friend that's lost something and you're a beginner, it probably would be okay to go out and look. But to do a broad offering, I think you need to understand your detector a little better, and be able to understand, because recovering a lost item is a lot different than looking for just any artifact in the grounds. There's a lot of good techniques that we use on the recovery side to eliminate having to dig up the yard when we go out and try and recover anything. So I think a beginner's probably not. I wouldn't recommend that they go out and promote that heavily initially. But if they've got a neighbor or something that said, "Hey, I lost my key in the yard" or something, and feel free to go out and try and find it.
And then earlier in the show, you were discussing when we were discussing metal detectors. You were talking about beach detecting over your just your regular field or yard. Is there detectors out there that are good for both?
There are, the main thing you need to look for is you have to determine, how you're going to use it. I mean, some people like to just hunt the sand, and others like to get in the water. So if you're going to get in the water, I recommend that you get a waterproof machine. Uh, all detectors have these days have a waterproof coil, so you can use them all in the water up to knee deep. But I always tell customers, if you're going to use a detector that's not waterproof, please don't trip. But the waterproof machines allow you to get farther in, and I've got, I myself and a lot of our customers will go out neck deep in the lakes and in the ocean to recover targets. If you are hunting in salt water, you're going to want a machine that it's preferred to have a machine that has what we call multiple frequencies, because the multiple frequency machines do a good job of eliminating the effects of the seawater and the salt. Uh, the less expensive machines are what we call single frequency machines. And while they'll work well in the dry sand, when you get to the wet salt sand, they'll tend to chatter quite a bit and require several adjustments to be functional. Um, but there's a lot of good quality machines that are both land and water. There are specialized strictly water machines, and there's specialized gold machines. But most of the mid-priced and higher-priced general-purpose machines will work well in both environments.
And then with a lot of the newer machines, they have a ground balance feature. How important is that ground balance, and how would you describe that as the importance of that to the beginner?
Well, it's good to learn how to ground balance. What the ground balance does is it allows the detector to adjust to any type of soil mineralization in the ground. And if you don't ground balance, if you've got some what we call hot ground, like there is in parts of Virginia where the soil is very highly mineralized, your detector is not going to work very well. It's not going to go very deep. So a proper ground balance allows you to get the best results out of the machine that you're using. And you know, if you're hunting regular ground on a regular basis in your area, once you've ground balanced it, it's probably not a need to ground balance it again. It'll most soil will stay pretty similar. Excuse me. So once you ground balance it, you probably just turn it on and go. Some of the machines these days also have what they call a tracking feature, which allows it to adjust to any changing mineralizations in the soil.
And then we talked about getting that pinpointer to help you find uh, the object in the hole once you dig your plug. A lot of the machines have pinpointers built into them nowadays. Is that viable to substitute for the pinpointer, or do you need that separate pinpointer?
Well, so there are two different purposes. The actual pinpoint function on the detector will allow you to uh, centralize where you're going to dig. So it'll allow you to determine better the smaller area to dig for your target. But once you dug that plug out, there is a chance that you might have missed it by, maybe a half inch. It might be in the side of the hole, might be farther down in the bottom of the hole, or it may be up in the plug. And so, um, when we didn't have pinpointers back in the day, we would take the dirt or the plug and wave it in front of the detector. If it didn't beep, then we'd get more dirt. And once we ran out of dirt, we'd have to dig the hole bigger. Nowadays, the pinpointers have a nice feature in that the sound actually starts beeping slowly, and as you get closer to the target in the hole or in the dirt, it'll start beeping faster and then go to a solid tone. You're right on the target. So it really does allow you to save time and also help you not dig too big a hole chasing a target that's not there.
And then at the end of the day, when you get home, you're done. How important is it to clean up your equipment and take care of your equipment?
Well, I think that's just like anything else. If you have a car or boat or anything like that, you want to maintain it properly, and uh, you may not have to clean it every time you use it. But what I tend to do is most of my machines now are rechargeable, and so when I use a detector out in the field, I'll plug it into my truck and charge it up on the way back home. And sometimes I'll take it out and clean it. Sometimes I'll just put it in the back and have it ready for the next time. Now, the other side of that is if you do any saltwater or sand, beach sand detecting, it's very important to take your rods apart and clean them very well every time you go to the beach, because uh, I've had a lot of occasions where people didn't do that, and over a course of a month or two, they found out that the sand had kind of fused the shafts together. So they weren't able to adjust the length of the shafts or even take them apart. So, uh, especially in the saltwater and sand environment, you're going to want to clean the shafts. And if you have a coil cover on, it's good advice to take the coil cover off from time to time and clean the dirt out of that. Sometimes you'll get little iron particles in that coil cover, and it'll affect the signal strength of your detector.
And would there be any advice or tips that we might not have covered through the questioning today on the show?
Well, I think you want to be a good steward of the hobby. Um, do your research. There's some great tools on the internet on how to. What I like to do is hunt old pastures, and I like to know what was there before. So there's some good resources on the internet with aerial photos, and also with topographical maps that may show what it might have been on a piece of property many years ago. So I like to try to use that to determine where the old home sites or the old one-room schoolhouses and places like that were on a piece of property before I go start to metal detect it.
And I think doing that research and being able to find those areas and those places are very important because it saves you a lot of time. It saves you a lot of aching muscles just by going out and just swinging, trying to find it by using the metal detector. Especially if you're looking for coins or old relics, doing that research and knowing where those places are getting close to where those places were is very important.
I think so too. And another tip is to look for areas where people congregated over the years, and that might be old picnic spots or old swimming holes or places where people held reunions. And the more research you do on history, asking the old timers in the town or in the coffee shop, a little bit about the history of the area and places where people congregated. That's where you're going to find more targets. Hunting an individual yard, you will find some targets, but you'll be limited because of the amount of activity that's been there. But when you go to a large picnic area, where people have picnicked there for 50 or 100 years, there's going to be hundreds of people that have congregated over there over the course of time. It's going to give you a lot more opportunity for items that were dropped.
Right. And one of the things I like to do if I'm on a farm or a large piece of property, if the homes aren't still on the property, a lot of times you'll get an indention in the ground where that home was. Uh, do you find that those are beneficial places to detect that?
I think so. And another tool that some of the detectors have is a feature called iron audio. And while we don't like digging a lot of nails, a lot of times you can use the iron audio to find the areas where there's a heavy concentration of nails. And when they tear an old house down or they re-roof an old house over the course of the years, a lot of those nails are going to end up in the ground. So when you get to a heavy concentration of nails in a field, that's generally where there was a building site.
And then we spoke about the metal detectors getting frustrated, and what's one way that you could advise the beginner to keep metal detecting fun so they don't get as frustrated and don't give up on the hobby?
Well, I think a lot of times if you hunt with a friend, it's fun to compare finds. And we talked earlier about getting involved with a group or a club, and a lot of clubs will put on a either an annual or a biannual hunt, and that's a great way to enjoy the camaraderie of the hobby, and it's also a great resource to learn your machine. Some of these hunts that are put on are what we call seeded hunts, where they actually plant silver coins and tokens in the ground, and those are a great way to go out and really understand how your machine reacts to individual targets. If you get in a field that's got hundreds of targets, you're going to get to know your machine very quickly.
Right. And again, keeping it fun and keeping the history alive, that's what the hobby's all about. Um, so that's the main thing for me is just trying to help people have fun, bring new people to the hobby. And like you said, those club events and those seated digs, those are a lot of fun and gives people the opportunity to find some stuff they may not and keep them interested in the hobby.
Very true.
Well, Wayne, I'd like to thank you for being on the show. And how can someone contact you or look up your store online, or how can someone get to metal detecting stuff if they want to purchase any metal detecting equipment?
Well, as I mentioned, we do have an actual storefront. If you happen to be visiting in near the Houston area, we're just north of Houston, about 30 miles in the Woodlands, Texas. In addition to that, we have a full online store at our website, which is www.metaldetectingstuff.com. And we're also some of our products are on eBay and even Amazon, so you can look for our name on those platforms too. The value of buying direct through our site is that over time we can offer promotions that won't be on some of the other platforms, and one of the things that kind of sets us apart from buying on Amazon and some other places is that we know the products. So I get a lot of customers that'll call me on the weekend and they'll say, "Hey, you sold me a Garrett AT Pro, and I don't remember how to ground balance it. Can you step me through that?" And that's just who we are. We have a real passion for the hobby, and we want everybody to be successful, and we're here to do what we can to make you successful. But you can use our online site. You can call me on the phone. You'll find our contact information on the bottom of our website, and that'll allow you to reach me directly. Um, and for those of you that don't like to purchase things over the internet, feel free to give me a call. Be glad to take all your information over the phone and get your stuff shipped out. We do ship anything over $100 is free shipping, and generally small items we ship priority mail or first class mail, and large items we like detectors we tend to ship UPS. So it generally gets there in most parts of the country in 3 or 4 days. Our customers in Texas usually get their product the following day, and we generally, if you call by 1 or 2 o'clock, we can easily get your product out the same day.
Very good. And one last thing before I let you go, Wayne. Over the time you've detected, what do you have a favorite find or something that you cherish more out of the things that you found?
Well, I have a couple. One is we had an opportunity uh, where somebody came in our store and told us that their parents had passed away, and they were cleaning out an attic, and found a map of the property with some X's on it. So they actually had a what we would call a treasure map. And so we went out. We put a team together. And there was about 6 of us that spent 2 weekends, and uh, in a team effort, we dug about 4 or 5 containers of silver coins that they had buried, or parents had buried on the property. And so those are what we call caches, and those were probably the most exciting find as a group that we were able to recover. Personal find, one of my favorites is a recent find that I did earlier this year. It's a Confederate button. It's what we call a Texas Star button. So it actually has a Texas star on the front. It's from a Texas Confederate soldier. So that was a pretty exciting find for me.
That's very awesome. Here in Kentucky, we don't get the chance to find a whole lot of Confederate items, so that's definitely a very nice find. Wayne, we'd like to thank you for being on the show today and all the great advice and tips you've given to the beginners. And we just want to say, don't forget, if for all your metal detecting equipment needs, contact Wayne at Metal Detecting Stuff and order that equipment. He'll handle it well and get you taken care of. Wayne, we thank you so much for being on the show, and we appreciate you so very well.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope I've given a little advice out there. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to give us a call anytime. And we'll be doing some promotions in the future with the podcast, and we'll have some giveaways in the future, and we'll help promote you guys. So we appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity as well, and again, we appreciate you coming on the show. We'll be in touch very shortly to talk about those giveaways and get that promotion out to our listeners. Again, thank you, and this has been the Heavy Metal Detector Podcast with Wayne Morin from Metal Detecting Stuff. Look up Heavy Metal Detectors on Facebook if you're looking for a group to join in your local area. They have a page for every state in the United States. Again, thank you, Wayne, and this has been Heavy Metal Detecting Podcast.